The 91st edition of the Roy's Boys podcast starts right now.
It's not about you. It's about that name on the front of your jersey.
And ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. Pushes into Hubert Davis. 8 seconds. Davis trying to get free. Over to Fox. Fox, baseline. Up for the shot. Does off the glass. Oklahoma calls timeout. But the game is over. The game is over. Carolina has upset number 1 Oklahoma.
With 20 seconds left to play. Goes back to Michael Jordan. Jumper from out on the left. Good! 63-62, 13, 12, 11. Georgetown with one timeout. Fred Brown looking. Oh, way to Worthy. Worthy 5. The Tar Heels are going to win the national championship.
Rebounded by Weber. Michigan out of timeout. Weber front court. Carolina with foul. He takes the timeout. They're out of timeout. Technical foul. Technical foul. Brown gets it into Williams. Here comes Williams front court. Williams on the drive. Gets it back out the head. Long outside shot. Short rebounded. It's over. Carolina has won the national championship. How about them Tar Heels? They are the national champions.
That's it. Make room for 2017. The Tar Heels are the national daggum champions.
That's what it's all about right there. That's on the floor. That's on your shirt. That's in your heart. That's why we're all here.
This is the Roy's Boys podcast with your host, Joshua Marlowe.
Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of the Roy's Boys podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services, and today we may have another loss to talk about with Carolina falling to Gonzaga last night in Spokane, 94-81. But we appear to be a little bit more optimistic about the team following a 5th loss in 6 games. I got a new haircut. I got my beard trimmed. I've got a new perspective of how the rest of the season is going to play out.
Oh, my God.
And with that, I will welcome in my co-host, Anthony. We hung out. We watched the game together.
Right.
What were your takeaways from the loss to the Gonzaga Bulldogs?
Oh, much better performance from them. Looked like they bought in like we asked them to. But you know what? We're not going to be negative on this podcast. We've been told that we are too negative on this podcast. So today, we are just going to have a 2-hour rap session about Jeremiah Francis's every aspect, and we'll just roll with that because, that was the biggest positive last night. But no, I mean, this was, I'm not going to say as good as you could hope they could play because they still had some turnovers that you just don't like to see. There were some moments where they were a little lackadaisical on the defensive end, but you get over 80 points for the first time this year. You only lose by 13 on the road in the kennel with a team that, let's be real honest, is nowhere near the same level that Gonzaga is right now. This Gonzaga team has a legit chance to probably cut down the nets when we hit March. So I'm overall, I think there's a lot of good things that you can take away from this. I think there's still some bad things that you can take from this. But the biggest thing was this is a step in the right direction, which was what we asked for after the Wofford game.
Yeah, I mean, look, Carolina was clearly outmatched in terms of talent. Gonzaga's not a deep team. Carolina actually plays more guys than Gonzaga, but Carolina doesn't have the talent. And that's even if Cle Anthony and Sterling Manley would have been on the floor. Gonzaga's got legitimate top 5, top 10 talent, and that was, the difference. I thought Carolina came out and they were ready to play. I mean, they didn't get blown out of the gate early. They actually led at the under 12 timeout, I think. So they looked like a typical Carolina team back against the wall. They're going to come out. They're going to find a way to beat a number 2 team on their home floor in a game that nobody gave them a chance in. It wasn't meant to be, but like you said, we saw a lot of positives last night on the offensive end that we just haven't seen before Cle Anthony got hurt, and especially after Cle Anthony got hurt. I thought the offense looked more in rhythm. I thought the ball movement at times was as good as it's been all year. At times, the guys without the ball moved as good as they've had all year. They got a little bit in transition, a lot because Gonzaga plays a little bit faster than they used to. Growing up, Gonzaga didn't play fast. They played a very deliberate half-court style game. Now that they're getting the kind of players that other schools can get, you've seen Mark Few kind of open up and let this team run. And it kind of helped Carolina because the pace was so up and down that you were able to get some easy buckets that you haven't just gotten all year, and it kept you in a shooting chance all game long. You were down 7 at halftime, but the thing is the second half and really the first 4 minutes of the second half is where Carolina has gotten killed in some of their losses. Michigan, Virginia, Ohio State, and Gonzaga all blitzed the heels coming out of halftime and really put the game away, and you're trying to come back from 23 down in that building. I don't even think Duke, Kentucky, Kansas could do that, let alone Carolina.
Yeah, that's something that we've seen quite often in the losses, as you've talked about, is you get down a big number and then you're forced to try to come back. And, it seems like you're right. The worst thing that happens to this team is they go into the locker room. And I don't know why that is, but it's something that they've just got to find a way to get corrected. And they will. That hasn't always been the problem in past years, and I think this team will be able to figure it out eventually as well. But that's definitely something that they have to get figured out when they get into conference play, especially if they're going to want to finish in the top half of the conference or, maybe even challenge for, a chance at a double bye, which is still possible considering that the rest of the ACC really as a conference is not anywhere near as good as they've been in the past. So I think it's something that you can work on. We saw last night there's a chance for this team to be a good basketball team. They did have, they still didn't shoot over 50%, but this was one of their best shooting nights, if not their best statistical shooting night of the season, shooting 45.6% from the field. 7-19 from three isn't great, but it's better. So I think that, this Carolina team, the up and down offense that we saw last night is where they're going to be most successful. I had said that before, and we just hadn't seen that really until this game. You hope that Gonzaga was just playing to their strength, but the other thing is I'm hoping to see Carolina sort of push the pace a little bit more. They forced more turnovers last night because the guys were a little bit more aggressive on the defensive end, and that's something you want to see, especially if you're going to be allowing a lot of these wide open shots for a stretch in the second half, which seems to happen just about every game now. So I think Carolina's definitely got some things that they're starting to show us, and the good news is that now you're pretty much out of the extremely brutal part of the stretch. Now you've got one game in Las Vegas against UCLA, and then after that you return home for 4 straight games. So this is the time right now where they're going to have to figure it out, and they need to build off of what we saw last night if they want to do that.
Yeah, I think that was really the thing we talked about in Wofford was, they got to get confidence for going out west. They clearly didn't get that with losing at home to the Terriers. But I think last night, even though you lost and Roy Williams left the game frustrated at his team, you still took something positive away from it. And that positive is that you may have found your point guard that you can run with until Cle Anthony returns, and that's Jeremiah Francis. And this is a guy that I talked about at length that we weren't going to see at all this year as he was battling back from an injury in high school that caused him to miss his final 2 years. Desperate times call from desperate measures. When you lose your starting point guard, you've got to find someone else because there's no way Francis is 100% healthy, and it kind of shows you his toughness level that he's out there battling. Played 23 minutes last night, scored 11 points, and was 4 of 9 from the field. That's as much as good production as you can get from a guy that you didn't expect to get from. He's aggressive in transition. He's aggressive off the bounce. He can take his man to the hole. He's going to scrap and play good defense. And it's something that, this Carolina team just needs. KJ Smith is a good basketball player, but he can only do so much because he's limited by his talent. Jeremiah Francis is a little bit more gifted, a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, and we don't know if he can start because he may not have passed a conditioning test as a requirement to start under Roy Williams. But he's definitely trending that towards that direction as a guy that could start in the near future.
I mean, you said it, and they were pointing it out on the broadcast last night that it looked like he was limping at points. This guy is fighting through, still fighting through an injury. He honestly probably should not be out there playing the type of minutes that he is. But at this point, you kind of have no choice. And I feel like he's the type of guy that says, look, let me get in there. I'm going to fight through it, and I'm going to find a way to get it done. And look, we saw it against Virginia, saw it a little bit against Wofford. Last night, he took it to the next level. This guy can push the floor the way Carolina wants to. And I said it with the offense struggling. You have to do two things. Get the ball inside and get out in transition. And he does both of those very well. The best we've seen from any of our point guards so far this year, I think, including Cle Anthony. He attacks the basket as hard as anybody does. And the good thing about him, and I there's still some times where, he is going to go up a little weak, but for the most part, he went up as strong as any point guard that we've seen so far this year. And I think that's what people have to be really encouraged about. I think people kind of forget about Jeremiah Francis. The biggest thing with him is that you got to remember that this guy was an ESPN 60 guy back in his sophomore year. Goes down with the injury, and now, we sit here 2 years later, a little over 2 years later, and all of a sudden you're looking at this guy and saying, okay, why was he rated as low as he was by most of these major recruiting sites? It was literally just based on the injury. There is a lot of talent there. He's not a guy that is going to blow you away with his shooting, I don't think, but he attacks the basket really well. He likes to get others involved, moves without the basketball, and the best thing that I like about him, and that you were mentioning, he gets out in transition and can push this offense the way we wanted to. And you mentioned Joel Berry as a comparison for him. I found that pretty interesting. Why do you think, kind of expand on why you think he reminds you a little bit of Joel Berry?
Well, if you look at his build, he's a little more stocky of a guard. He's not, a rail thin guy like Page. Ty Lawson was kind of a little bit smaller because he was so quick on his feet. Barry was kind of the guy that he was a punisher. He's a guard that wanted contact. He invited it because he fed off of it. And you kind of get the same feel from Francis that the contact doesn't affect his game. It kind of, makes him more comfortable because it's part of the game. And when you have a guy that's willing to invite contact and force it and can still be tough enough to make plays through it, that's something. And it's just something that I think Carolina needs, because you need toughness on the perimeter. You haven't gotten that from Cle Anthony or Leaky Black, guys that seem to be timid when they get in the painted area. Hell, you saw in Virginia, he took the ball right at him. You saw at Wofford, he took it right at him. And last night was no different. He's not scared, I guess is the best way to put it. And it's something that Roy Williams has, been talking about. We got to be tougher and all this other stuff. Jeremiah Francis is everything that you've been saying you've needed. Whether it was coming off the bench or now in a starting role, he's answering or fitting all the mold of what you want to find a way to get this team getting in the right direction. Because nobody thought we'd be here at 6-5 in the middle of December wondering if this team was going to make the NCAA tournament if they don't turn it around. I think Francis is a guy that, when you see him on the floor, the effort level picks up. He's inspired his teammates because they know he's playing hurt. And they've responded to his presence on the floor, which I guess is something that you didn't get with KJ. They didn't respond to KJ. It was just like, well, this is our best option at the time.
Well, I think they're also a little more limited with KJ because, when you got a guy in Jeremiah Francis step on the floor and immediately want to drive the basket, and is really just making it a lot easier on you guys, especially on the inside guys, when he's when he's driving the basket, forcing defenders to have to try to crash the glass. I think that he's doing the things that you need to do to free up guys that are just, let's be real honest. The rest of these guys on offense, they're not moving around the way they should be. We saw it last night. They started out, they were moving well without the basketball, and then that sort of just dipped off once Jeremiah Francis left the floor for the first time. It came back once he stepped back on the floor. So, yeah, I think you're right that he's a guy that can sort of drive the motors of these other guys, and that's something that'll be interesting to see if he can continue to do as we go along. The interesting part is how much can you actually play him is the question. Like, how injured is he? Because there's no way he's 100% healthy. Let's just be real honest. With the severity of the knee injury and where we heard he was at in the offseason until now, there's no